Hi everyone, thanks for joining this session. My name is Sajid, and today I want to talk to you about our last 10 plus years of journey of what I call the hunt for the perfect platform. And those of us who are in the space knows how challenging that hunt often is because the idea of the perfect platform keeps on shifting, right? And Bedrock is the name of the platform or framework that we ended up building to handle some of those challenges over the years. And today I would like to share some of that experience, what worked, but mostly what did not work. And hopefully you'll take away some useful tips from our learnings. So a bit about us. We are the streaming and engineering division within Foxtel Group. Foxtel Group is the leading subscription television service for Australian market for like last 20 plus years now. And streaming and engineering division was set up almost like a startup within the Foxtel Group to tackle this emergence of disruptive streaming services like Netflix and Amazon that was coming in the market. As a result, we released KO in 2018. KO is think of Netflix for sports. In 2019, we released Binge. Binge competes in the same market space of video on demand services for movies and shows, just like Netflix or Disney or Amazon for Australian market. Although the streaming division was set up in 2018, the original team's journey starts back in 2011 as a very small engineering team building broadcast automation for on-prem data center. Think of router switches, video recording automation, playback automation, all things geared toward on-prem services. KO was our first attempt at building a fully cloud-hosted product. You know, KO is supposed to be internet-scale product handling more than a million concurrent live streams on a game day, and we needed to build it in the cloud to deal with the scale. Also, it was 2018, and cloud was cool by then, right? But in retrospect, how we built KO was just a reflection of how we built product for our on-prem data centers. And we ended up using AWS almost like an extension to our on-prem data center. Then in 2020, we had a second chance to build a very similar video on demand streaming service, Binge. We took the lesson we learned from KO and built our truly cloud native product, or at least what we think is the true cloud native product. And this is where we accidentally built the Bedrock Framework, which is our platform offering. When we started, we didn't set out to build a platform offering, but it kind of emerged out of necessity. And today we'll talk some of that. We now service both on-prem and cloud stack via our Bedrock framework. And looking back, I think the most important lesson that we learned is cloud native is not about where you run your software. It doesn't matter whether it's on-prem or cloud or Google. It's mostly about how you build and deliver that product or software. So our first step in the platform journey, I would say, started with our Docker adoption. I call it the Docker fever. By 2016, we leaned heavily into microservice architecture, and some of the challenges that came with microservice architecture around hosting our microservices, getting our operations team to allocate the right type of hardware with the right software packages was getting really difficult. So when we started adopting Docker, we finally thought we had the perfect platform, right? Finally, we had a universal standard for packaging our app and delivering them. But soon we discovered managing a fleet of containers without some sort of an orchestrator can get very tricky once your container fleet starts growing like beyond 50. And relying on tools like Ansible for container management proved to be too complex for the developers, and it was kind of the wrong level of abstraction. So we didn't get the adoption that we hoped out of the dev community for things like Ansible and all. And without the contribution from the dev community, the backlog on the operations team keeps on growing. On the other hand, we solved our application architecture problems via adopting things like microservices. But in reality, we shifted a lot of those problems towards our operational team. So now instead of managing a handful of big monolithic server, they are managing these hundreds of mini server that takes almost equal the amount of effort and time. In retrospect, we didn't envision or plan for the operational complexity that comes with the microservice architecture adoption. Then again, it was a very small, highly experienced team, and we kind of knew how to work around those challenges, and it was still manageable, and we were still slowly making progress. Then in 2018, KO happened. Our first challenge of KO was exponential growth. Our team went from 20 to 150 to 100 developers within the span of 6 months. Also, by then, we had a few services running in AWS. So we kind of thought we knew how to build cloud native APIs into Amazon. Our first challenge was hiring and onboarding. It was very difficult to onboard new team members in our complex tech stack. Standardization was another very big challenge. We had an incident of three different teams doing the same implementation of a shared problem in four different ways. If you do the math, you know how crazy that is. We had some attempt at adopting serverless or lambda based services, but that didn't go very well for a Java or Spring microservice team. We were trying to adopt Kubernetes, but Kubernetes in its raw form was too much of a cognitive load for the developers. But most importantly, we started seeing the gap between our cloud developers and on-prem developers started increasing. But both team was actually building different part of the product using a very similar tech stack, but their way of building and delivering the software from for on-prem and cloud started drifting, and it was getting really hard or challenging to share the knowledges or expertise. I guess our story is not very different from any team that went through a similar growth experience, which involves a lot of like ad hoc or on the spot problem solving, a lot of trickery, and escaping a lot of last minute disasters. So we released KO with our traditional EC2 Ansible AMI image baking stack. And lucky for us, we got a lot of commercial success. Australians love their sports, and there was no other offering like KO in the market. But back in our head, we kind of knew we couldn't continue or sustain the KO model. It was not sustainable, it was not scalable, and it had a lot of key people dependency. So when the same team got commissioned to build Binge, a very similar video streaming product just like KO, we went back in the drawing board. By then, we had about 10 plus years experience of trying to build that perfect delivery pipeline, and we kind of knew what did not work. Around the same time, we naturally came across Accelerate, the book, and the Dora findings. It was a true eye opener for us. We got so inspired by the book that the nickname for our first DevOps team was Team Accelerate. Uh, so while Dora got a lot of name for those key success indicators like lead time, change failure rate, or deployment frequency, but the thing that we really appreciated was the capability map and how it relates to the business and cultural outcome. That was a great aha moment for us, and it has become the north star of our decision making process in our architectural and product delivery lifecycle. We started putting those capability targets into our roadmap. We maintain a roadmap of capability metrics, as you can see on the right hand side table, that shows our current position and where our gaps are and where we should invest next. For example, we are investing a lot of time and effort this year on our test data management and shift left on the security. With the accelerator of Dora funding, we finally came to that realization that cloud native is not about where you run your software, whether it's in the on-prem or in the cloud. It's about how you create and deliver it. And those Dora technical capability map was a good navigational model for us to follow and achieve that true cloud native competency. So if Dora is the requirement or vision, we adopted the cloud CNCF projects and frameworks as our path to achieving those goals. Based on our current situation and constraint, we identified a few key characteristics that we wanted out of this platform, namely standardization, containerization, microservice, and orchestration. But at the heart of it, we wanted to enable, right? We wanted to enable the developers and team to be self-sufficient and leverage these CNCF offerings to achieve that efficiency and effectiveness. But have you seen the CNCF landscape? It is much easier said than done. And we were facing a lot of difficulties with the steep learning curve and the cognitive load, right? So how do you go around that? We all know the solution to any complex problem is kind of to add a new layer of abstraction. But then again, you cannot solve the problem of having too many layers of abstraction with yet another layer of abstraction, right? And this is where I think as platform engineers or architects, a lot of our effort goes in. Too much abstraction, you're sacrificing the underlying capability, and too little abstraction, you're subjecting yourself to for too much cognitive load. But the dilemma is pretty much constant in our field. Think of Docker versus ECS versus EKS, or CloudFormation or CDK or Terraform. So our way of putting the right level of abstraction starts with what we call the project vending machine. It was built in 2018 or 19. We recently moved it into our internal developer portal, which is powered by Backstage. The way it works is like a dev comes into the portal to fill up a form and order a new application in the vending machine. So vending machine does what the name sounds like. It takes care of all the steps necessary from creating an application to hosting it in the production environment. We have a catalog of blueprint applications, which we call Bedrock, from Java microservices to video processing pipeline to machine learning pipelines, etc. And the process takes about 2 to 5 minutes. But at the end of the process, you have a fully production-ready application baseline on which the developers can start building right away. Before vending machine, this process would take us from weeks to months to reach to that level of maturity. So vending machine uses Bedrock and spits out a new service, and it also hosts the application into the preview environment. So we believe it's much easier to reverse engineer what your project is doing rather than trying to figure out from all the internet and all the reference to all the other projects to figure out how to get something done. So a bit about the Bedrock framework. At the heart of the Bedrock philosophy is to gather our community knowledge into one place and distribute them across all our services via automation. There are some common things like finding the best structure for your Java project, finding the right testing framework, how do you set up your mocking framework, and so on and so forth, right? Ideally, we would document them in Confluence before, but that was very hard to scale and enforce, right? With Bedrock, we centralize this common expertise so that the devs don't have to reinvent the wheel and they can bring new innovation on top of our existing capabilities. One big point of Bedrock is there is no centralized Bedrock team. These projects run as internal open source projects. They mature over time from the contribution of the devs who actually use the Bedrock framework to spin up new applications. Another key feature of Bedrock is it is structured in a way that it enables the child projects to maintain that upstream relationship and do new pull requests. One great example was when we migrated from Jenkins to GitHub Action, because all our Bedrock projects had the same structure. The child projects could just do a latest pull, and all of a sudden they became GitHub Action compatible, and we imported hundreds of those projects into GitHub Action overnight. Another thing is like there's no centralized Bedrock team, as I said. So the decision making, what goes into Bedrock and what stays out of Bedrock into the local project, happens almost like a community. All the tech leads, senior developers, or Bedrock contributors kind of gather fortnightly or monthly to discuss what goes in and what stays out. We try to keep things simple, but we also try to make hard things possible, right? That's the great Python. I think it comes from Python. We don't abstract any component of the project via some sort of a shared library or code or anything like that. So all the code, CI/CD pipeline, and everything is actually inside your project. So, and 90% of the time, you don't need to change or touch any of those code, but you can actually, for 5% of the time, you can actually go ahead and do your customization that is specific to your project specific or local to your project. So we don't try to impose any sort of restriction via Bedrock. And the lastly, but most importantly, it's very hard to get your standards or best practices right on the first go. So having the pull request capability from the Bedrock allows you to be iterative and introduce new standard or best practices from Bedrock that flows into the child project. So this is how the end-to-end looks like. The dev starts their journey in Backstage. Vending machine bootstraps the application with all the necessary nuts and bolts. Dev continue working on the new feature under a feature flag. Once they're done, they merge their code into master, and that gets automatically deployed into an integration test environment where the end-to-end functional automated tests run. After which the binary gets promoted into production with the feature flags turned off. That doesn't have any side effect and allows the devs and the testers to dog food their application into production. Once they're done, the app slowly gets progressively rolled out to our customers. So this is how it looks like. A developer comes to our developer portal and orders an app from the Bedrock catalog. We have Bedrock catalog for all common patterns of applications that we have, namely Java microservice, Pythonless, serverless or Lambda applications, Docker, data processing pipelines, machine learning pipelines, and stuff like that. Once the project vending machine creates the project, it tries to automate each and every step a developer has to take to deploy the application to production. For example, it registers the application into our application catalog, which is Backstage. Set of features like automated test reporting, CI/CD framework, automated security check reports, all those things comes out of the box within the first 5 minutes of a developer creating the vending machine. Before this, it would take us like months or weeks or months to really reach that level of maturity. Things like best practices of using things like feature flags, patterns, and libraries are all baked into Bedrock, so the developers can just start using them. And that will also adhere to our company best practice and our standard of using feature flags and similar practices. Initially, when we started Kubernetes, we didn't have Istio or Canary based deployment. But once we adopted it, it was a very easy task or rollout process for us because all our projects was coming from the same structure. So it was just another pull from the upstream Bedrock, and suddenly all your projects became Istio enabled. Finally, some key learnings. We promote self-service and enablement for the developers as a platform team, right? But it is a bit of a cultural and mindset shift for the developers to take that ownership and leverage those self-service capabilities, right? They still have to go through a bit of a learning curve, and it's still extra work for them, right? So we often have this conversation of, like, why can't the DevOps do it for us? Why can't they set up the operational dashboard like before, or why can't they set up the CI/CD platform for like before, right? Uh, so we actually went back and changed the name of our DevOps team into SRE team because we kind of try to promote that idea of DevOps is the culture, and it is a shared responsibility within the whole organization. But that takes time to get established and settled in. Secondly, we all are familiar with that concept of, oh, we are it's too tricky or we are too busy to change the wheels of the running car, right? Uh, and our learning of that is sometimes it's best to work on a second cart and shift the workload over the time. So when we built Binge, we didn't allow the KO to influence our decision making process, right? We released Binge and we developed the Bedrock Framework, which is our new cart, and slowly migrated KO into that Bedrock Framework over the period. I think that trying to establish some of the best practices early on is good. It kind of saves you from all the extra cost down the line. But then again, trying to get the things right on the first go is also almost impossible, right? So keeping that space for iteration is super important. One good example is when we did the Bedrock framework. It's not just a templating framework. It also allows you to pull upstream changes. The way we have structured it, it allows you to pull the upstream changes. That allows us to like learn and kind of like push those learnings into the child projects over the time. And last but probably the most important one is change is hard, right? Systems that are established like ourselves for like over the period of 10 years are by default resistant to changes, right? It's kind of a natural process, and not everyone will be happy in that process. So we need to find that early adopters or believers, and we need to build a support structure to carry on the mission, right? Because the journey is not a quick and easy fix. It's not a 3 months project that you can run and suddenly become cloud native. So you have to kind of build yourself to sustain the journey over the long period. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time and joining this session. And hopefully you can take a few things from our learning and use it in your journey. Thanks again.